proportions. This module will explain the basics of inverse proportions. Students, now we know about direct proportion. Now we will learn about inverse proportion. Let's look at a scenario to understand the inverse proportion. Suppose 10 men can complete a piece of work in 5 days. Then 15 men can complete the same work in 3 days. Thus, increase with the number of people, the number of days required to complete the work decreases. Thus, increase in one quantity leads to decrease in other quantity. This is called inverse proportion. In case of inverse proportion, if one of the variables x increases, then the other variable y also decreases. Similarly, if one of the variables x decreases, then the other variable y increases. Inverse proportion for two variables can also be expressed by the relationship shown here. Students, let's look at an example. A. Could the relationship between the following quantities be represented by an inverse variation equation? 1. The rate of travel and the time needed to travel a certain distance. 2. The number of pages you read in a book and the number of pages you are left to read. 3. The rate of travel and the total distance traveled. Explanation. Students, let's explain the scenarios. 1. Yes, the rate of travel and the time needed to travel a certain distance is inverse proportion. 2. No, the sum of the two quantities, not the product, is constant. 3. No, this is a direct variation equation. Students, look at one more example. A. There are 80 soldiers in a cantonment. Food provision for them is for 10 days. How long will these provisions last if 20 more soldiers join the group? Explanation. Inverse variation can be expressed with the relation shown here. Here, x1 is 80, y1 is 10, x2 is 100. Then, the value of y2 is calculated as 8. Thus, the food will last for 8 days if the number of soldiers is increased to 100. Example B. A box of sweets has 25 rows of sweets with 12 sweets in each row. If the number of sweets in each row is 20, then find the number of rows of sweets in the box. Explanation. Students, let's recall the inverse proportion relation. Correct. Inverse variation can be expressed with the relation shown here. Here, x1 is 25, y1 is 12, y2 is 20. Then the value of x2 is calculated as 15. Here, there are 15 rows of sweets in the box, each row containing 20 sweets. Students, look at the example D. 6 men can complete a work in 80 days. One man fell sick and left the work. Find how many days will be required by the remaining people to complete the same work. Explanation. Lesser the number of men, more will be the time required to finish the work. Hence here we have inverse proportion. Here x1 is 6, y1 is 80, x2 is 6 minus 1, that is 5, then the value of y2 is calculated as 96. Thus, 5 men will complete the work in 96 days.